friends. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And today it's my pleasure to be having a conversation with Dave Eicher. Dave is a highly respected musician, church musician, and organist. He has been an organizational leader in several different groups, including the American Guild of Organists, the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, the Presbyterian Association of Musicians, and of course, the Hymn Society. He's not only been an active member, but he's also served in leadership at the Hymn Society, where he's served as conference chair, treasurer, and president. He was named a fellow of the Hymn Society in 2023. Dave's also been involved as an editor. He's edited some books and most famously served as project director and editor of Glory to God, which is the official hymnal of the Presbyterian Church USA. And I know that with us today are some of the members of that committee who are joining us for the interview today. So it's good to have everybody with us. It's great to see a nice turnout of people today. And I do invite you, if you have joined us, to participate in the conversation. You can make comments in the chat, or you can put questions in the Q&A. So I'll be monitoring those as we go through our time today. And certainly welcome your hymnal. I would say hymnals. Welcome your hymnals. Welcome your comments. Well, Dave, it's good to be with you today. Welcome.
Good to be here, Mike. Thanks.
Um, I like to start by asking you about your early background. You know, how you got into all this. What drew you to be interested in church music and ministry?
Well, I like to say that I think it was predestined that I would be in this field. Um, my my father was a pastor in the Church of the Brethren. And there was always a lot of music in our household. He had studied voice when he was at college. That was not his degree. But he took voice lessons. And my mother also always sang around the house, doing house chores. You know, there was always she was always singing hymns while she was vacuuming or dusting or whatever she was doing. Um, and my sister, who is 3 years older, also, sang. She took piano lessons. And yeah, there was always lots and lots of music in the house. We didn't have a television. So family entertainment was games and puzzles and reading, lots of books, lots of reading. And I think I was probably in second or third grade when my parents bought a big console record player, playing vinyl records. And that then became sort of a constant in our house. I mean, as soon as I'd come home from school, I'd put on a record to listen to. So yeah, that music was always there. And of course, with Dad being a pastor, I was always in church. They didn't hire babysitters. They just took us with them to everything at the church. So I was always there, sat with my mom next to my mom most of the time growing up. And when there would be a choir and she would sing in the choir, I would sit beside her in the choir. So I kind of grew up just being there and expecting that that was part of life. I didn't anticipate that my career would be that. I had a lot of interests growing up, could not decide even when I went to college exactly what it was I wanted to do, but I knew that it had something to do with the sciences. I was very interested in science and medicine, and so I actually went to college as a pre-med major.
Oh, well,
Um,
before we go to college,
yeah, yeah,
I want to go back for just a second.
sure,
I got really caught on the record player and
yeah,
you putting on records when you got home from school.
yeah.
What did you like to listen to?
Well, my folks, a lot of, it was a pretty good variety of stuff, but I remember the Grand Canyon Suite of Faire de Groffet was one of my favorites. I loved the on the trail movement with the donkeys, dum,
Right.
rhythm, and I loved to play that. My dad had old 78 RPM recordings of the Don Cossack chorus from Russia. And I always found that to be just really fascinating. So I listened to that a lot. They had a Reader's Digest collection of big band, Tommy Dorsey and big band music. And so listened to that. But I'd say that from early on, my main attraction was to the more classical music. They had Beethoven symphonies and sort of the traditional things
Mhm.
like that. So yeah, that was it. It was I was always attracted to things with rhythm.
Well,
Rhythm, I think, is the first thing that always grabbed me with music. So, yeah. My mom says when I was a toddler, I think I was three or so, three or four, and they ordered off of a box of cereal something that was called a Tudor tune. And it was like a one octave little xylophone kind of thing, each tuned whistles basically, and each one had a little accordion-like uh, tube that you would hit, and it would force air through and whistle. And it came with a little book that had the notes on the music staff, but then it had the color coordinated and that sort of thing. So I was fascinated by that apparently, and spent hours, probably drove them to distraction, banging on that thing and whistling those notes. But she said that it wasn't long after that I did that I asked her where those notes were on the piano because we did have a piano at home, and she showed me, where middle C was, and so where those notes were, and I started picking out those melodies on the piano, playing those on the piano because I like that sound better than the whistle.
mhm.
I think my parents like that sound better too.
I'll bet they were relieved at that. And so in church, did you get actively involved in music at the church?
Well, of course, there was a kids' choir, and there was no way I was getting out of that with my dad being the pastor. And so, yes, I sang there. As I mentioned, I sat by my mom, so I sang with her all the time. So, actually, the first notes that I learned to sing was the alto line because she was an alto, and
Oh,
so I matched what she sang. Um, and then when I started to take piano, I wanted to take piano early, but my parents said, no, your sister started in third grade. When you get to third grade, you can start piano. So we moved. My dad took a new church when I started third grade, and it was a country church. Almost all the churches he served were country churches. So we were out in a dairy farm area of Southern Virginia, and there was one house within a mile, and it was across the road from us, and she taught piano.
hmm.
So I said, okay, it's third grade. Mrs. Milliron is across the road. She teaches piano. I want to start piano. So I did that. And once I started piano, it wasn't long after that she she belonged to the church where my dad was pastor, and she talked to the woman who played the organ there, and they would got me to playing on the hymns at church early on, probably maybe fourth, fifth grade. I started playing along with the organist on all the hymns because that was the tradition in those churches was both piano and organ together. So
Wow. So then
yeah,
when you went to college, you were thinking science, not
yeah.
music.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean I wanted to keep doing music. I had started playing for my dad's church the organ. I started taking organ lessons and started playing for church in 10th grade when we moved again and I was starting high school and so I started organ lessons and started playing for church. So when I went away to college, I didn't really, like I said, I didn't really know what I wanted to do or where. So I had a hard time picking a college because didn't want to pick one based on a major. So I decided, well, my sister is at Manchester College at that time. Now it's Manchester University in Northern Indiana. And I thought, well, I'll just go there because it's a liberal arts college. I can get a general education until I figure out what I'm doing. And my sister's there, so my parents can drop us both off at the same school. But I did start taking the pre-med courses. I started that way and decided after about a year or so that actually what I was really interested in was the chemistry part. And so I thought I might go to pharmacy school. So I started looking into that. And then eventually I thought, well, I could kind of combine things if I became a medical technologist. So I kind of thought that I would do that. And finally, I was also by that time involved. I had was singing in the a cappella choir at the college. I was the organist at the local Church of the Brethren, the big college church, and taking organ lessons still there. And I was tearing myself in half, trying to figure out what to do. And I finally I called my parents and I said, help me. I can't do both of these things. And I love them both, but I don't know what to do. And to their everlasting credit, although I hated them for it at the time, they said, "Oh, we love you, son, but this decision is yours.
Wow.
There's no way we're going to make this decision for you." So I just took a couple of weeks, and every time I had to either go do a chemistry lab or go practice for my organ lessons, I'd go, which one would I rather do? Which one do I want to do first? And it kept coming back to that I wanted to go practice and wanted to work on music. And so I decided then to switch to a music major. Now, this was spring term of my junior year in college. um, Fortunately, I have been taking music courses all along, so I didn't have a lot of catch up to do, but I made this decision 2 weeks after the drop date for classes. So I had to finish out all my advanced organic chemistry, biochem courses, and all of that. And I went into my organic chemistry professor and said, Dr. Miller, I've made this decision and I'm going to switch to a music major. And he said, well, I wondered when you were finally going to get around to doing that. And I said, well, you could have told me 2 weeks ago so I could have dropped the class. He
Mhm.
sang in the choir at the church where I was the organist, so he knew of my interest. And
Wow.
so anyway, yeah, I always say to people, it was amazing to go into a final for an organic chemistry class, having not studied for it at all. I went to class, I did my labs, but I told him, I said, I can't take any time to study outside of class because I have to catch up on all these other things. That was a pretty wild experience, but I learned later that my parents hoped that I would actually finish the science degree and then stay an extra year or two and get a music degree as well. Um, but yeah, that's to their credit, as I say, they let me make and live with that decision. And once I made it, I never regretted it. So.
That's pretty disciplined on their part to be able to not say what they were thinking at the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I actually did thank them for it later because I said, I wanted you to make the decision for me, but you gave exactly the right advice, which was it was my life. I was going to have to live with this, and I needed to make that decision. So yeah.
Wow, that's a great story. Great story. So you graduated with your music degree and then what did you do?
Well, because I had made that decision so late, I thought, I don't really know what I want to do with this music. I mean, I assumed it was something in church, but I also thought I can't make a living doing that. So, I was having a hard time with that. So I talked to my organ teacher from Manchester, and he said, well, why don't you go on to graduate school and give yourself a couple of years to kind of live with this decision?
Hmm.
And so I started auditioning for conservatories and music schools, and the more I did that, the more I thought, I'm not sure that that's really the direction I want to go. I mean, I don't think I want to do concert organ. I think it's more than that. And so again, my organ teacher said, well, my friend Philip Gehring is the organ professor at Valparaiso University, and they have a graduate degree. It's not a music degree, it's a liberal arts degree. So it was a Master of Arts and Liberal Studies, and you had to take at least 10 credit hours in one major field. Well, I just did, it was a 30 credit hour degree. 4 hours of the history of Western civilization was required of everybody in the degree. And then I did the other 26 hours in organ and church music.
Wow.
So I basically kind of made up my own church music degree, which they didn't have at the time. Later, they did add it. So yeah, that's where I really started honing in and focusing in on the church music aspect of it. And while I did a graduate organ recital and did all the big recital pieces, it was really I knew even as I was doing it, those aren't going to be practical for use in church. But Valparaiso, fortunately, was a very rich liturgical tradition, which was a new experience for me. We had Christmas Sunday and Easter Sunday when I was growing up, and everything else was Sunday. And
Right.
My dad almost got thrown out of the church he was in when he decided he wanted to introduce an Advent wreath, because that was this Catholic thing, that shouldn't be coming into the church. So the liturgical tradition at Valparaiso was really a eye opener for me, and really kind of set me on a different path entirely from what I thought it would be. I'll never forget that first service in the chapel of the Resurrection at Valparaiso, which, if you haven't been there, is at the time, and I think it probably still is, the largest collegiate chapel. Seats about 2,000 people.
I think that's right.
Um, and it was a Holy Cross day. So it was big day, red vestments, incense, candles, processions with brass, and I was hooked immediately from that point on. So yeah, so I spent 2 years there doing that degree, playing in a Methodist church, and hanging out with my Lutheran friends and learning a lot about liturgy. And so that while I was there, then when I was about to graduate, I auditioned and got a job at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Hinsdale, Illinois, which is a northwestern suburb of Chicago. But it was a part-time job, and it was a building program. I was trying to build up their children's choir and their adult choir. They had a very old organ they had bought from the organ clearinghouse.
Hmm.
And Yeah, that was an intriguing, interesting, and difficult time, especially financially. I always tell people I got paid twice a month from the church, and my paycheck after taxes and withholding was $181 every 2 weeks, and my
Wow.
rent was 180. So
Oh,
after I paid my rent, I had $1.46 or something for 2 weeks. I was trying to get into professional accompanying in the Chicago
wow.
area, but I didn't have the financial resources to hold on long enough to develop all the contacts that I needed for that. I did accompany for a while in a voice studio at Northwestern University, but anybody who's done that work knows that it hardly covered my gas money to drive back and forth to the
Right.
university. So um, I realized when I went to the bank and drew the last money out of my savings account to buy something to eat that I was going to have to do something different. And I had met a woman at Valparaiso when I was in grad school. She was studying voice there, and she was the director of music at the Presbyterian Church in LaPorte, Indiana, again, Northwest Indiana. And she and her family became very dear friends. And I just said to her, Linda, well, a lot of you will know her, Linda Lewis. She was a Hymn Society member, was actually a former treasurer of Hymn Society. And she said, I called her and I said, I got to do something different. And she said, well, we're looking for an organist at the church. It's not full time. So I auditioned, got that job, and then her husband, who was an attorney and had all kinds of business contacts, got me a job at a bank in South Bend. And
Oh,
so that's how I pieced together income for a while. So,
that's so many musicians have had that experience of having to, and now a lot of clergy have to do it too, have to put together those things. One of the things, Dave, that really strikes me is in not only your conversation today, but also in reading your bio, is the deeply ecumenical nature of your career. I mean, growing up in Brethren family and going to a Brethren college and Lutheran and Presbyterian and Methodist, and then I saw you studied with Suicide Martin at Notre Dame and being at St. Mary, so the Catholic thing too. So I just wonder, how that I don't know how that has affected your life overall, the ecumenical nature of your um, trajectory.
well, I loved it. I loved all those different experiences, and I loved seeing the different. My husband Joe always talks about the different denominations being the different parts of the personality of God, different expressions of
Mhm.
personality. And I guess that was something that was really attractive to me. I kept finding things that I really liked. I would say the more liturgical tradition became sort of felt like home to me in a way. But yeah, all those experiences I felt broadened what I was able to do wherever I was. And I'd have to say that that's why, I think the Hymn Society became such a home for me, because I could constantly interact with people from different traditions. So the first, Linda, again, the director of music at the church in LaPorte, one day, shortly after I started playing there, a couple of years later, we got in the mail a mailing from then the Hymn Society in America for the annual convocation. And this was 1982. It was to be held at Emory in Atlanta. And she and I both looked at this brochure and thought, huh, that looks kind of interesting. Um, maybe we should go. So we went to the pastor, who, by the way, was also a very influential part in my career, because he was so supportive of me going away and doing all these things. Um, but he said, "Yeah, I think you should go." So the two of us went to that conference, and Fred Pratt Green, Timothy Dudley Smith were both named fellows that year. It was Canon Chapel was new, the organ was new. Uh, John Geisler was the president at the time, so the Moravian, he brought up the whole big brass band from Winston-Salem, and I was just hooked in right away. So since 82, I think I counted up that I've missed five conferences in those years. Um, and it just became a home. Yeah.
Yeah, you've been very involved, not only in the Hymn Society, but other organizations as well. In fact, the first time I met you was you were at that time serving as interim executive director of the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, and it just struck me your deep involvement in all these things. And I wonder if you have any reflections on the value of organizations for the church and for what we do.
Well, absolutely. I mean, again, all of these things just came to me. Um, and I think maybe because of my willingness to not just be pigeonholed into one area. But and again, it probably goes back to being a kid and couldn't decide what I wanted to do. I had so many interests.
Yeah.
The Valparaiso connection got me deeply involved with a lot of the Lutheran things. As a employed Presbyterian musician, I felt like I obviously needed to be involved in my denominational organization, so I became involved with Presbyterian Association of Musicians. Again, this pastor that was so influential, he said, David, if you're going to have access to the upper courts of the Presbyterian Church, we got to get you ordained as an elder because that's the way you get that kind of access. And so I was ordained a ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church. Then it came our presbytery's turn to name somebody to one of the major denominational committees at the time, and the opening was on the Theology and Worship Committee, Theology and Worship Ministry Unit, it was called at the time. And so I was elected to that committee, and they assigned me to be the liaison to the Presbyterian Association of Musicians. And so that began to develop that area of my life a little bit more. And then I became president of PAM, of the Presbyterian Association. And during my time on the board, we decided to move from a part-time administrator to a full-time executive director. So I kind of went through that whole process, and then the Lutherans knew about that, and so when they were thinking they were going to be moving to an executive director, they called and asked me if I would be the interim and kind of help them develop that whole process for their organization. So all of those organizational things put me, I'd say the major benefit for me was putting me in contact with a host of amazingly talented people.
Yeah. Who was that first executive director that you hired in for PAM?
Alan Barthel.
Well, I was going to say, I met Alan the same time I met you. That was an interesting experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
One of the things also that strikes me is when you get involved in an organization, you do kind of have a tendency to kind of go all the way and to be deeply involved. In the Hymn Society, as I mentioned in the intro, you've been a conference chair and a treasurer and president. How long in all did you serve on the executive committee?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I served two terms as treasurer,
Yeah.
so that would be 4 years.
Yeah.
And then I rotated off there in 2000, if I remember. And then I think I was at that time we did president-elect, president, and immediate past president served on the board. So
We still do
you were
that.
6-year term.
Yeah.
So it was 10 years altogether that I would have been a board member, right?
Well,
Executive committee.
you're up there in the ranks of those who have served the longest, I think.
Yeah, my theme song is "I'm just a boy who can't say no." Yeah,
I think Paul Richardson is on this webinar, and if he probably knows who is the longest serving EC member of all time, but
yeah, he
you're
probably does.
you're certainly up there. So one of the things I read in your bio was that in your time as president of the Hymn Society, that you streamlined the administrative processes. I don't know if you've ever seen that in your bio, but I wondered what that meant.
That's a good question. It probably, yeah. So I did a Myers-Briggs thing one time, and this was years ago, and I don't remember all the details of the description of the way that I process, but I know for a fact that that I would love it if people would make decisions quickly and then just do it. Right. I mean, that's sort of my main personality type. But I also have this part of me that wants to make sure that everybody agrees with that decision before we move on, which is a kind of a utopian view, obviously, because you rarely get everybody to agree.
Well, I will say, just as a parenthesis, that having served on a committee where you were the conference chair, I see both of those movements. I saw both of those qualities in you.
Yeah. Well, I certainly have come to learn that about myself. And it was interesting when I read my Myers-Briggs evaluation is that I was almost down the middle on every characteristic. And I think that was again because of my wanting to include everybody, make sure everybody felt like part of the process. And even if they didn't agree with the final decision, at least they felt heard and felt valued with their opinion. And I guess I have to credit my dad a lot with that. He was, the Church of the Brethren is one of the historic pacifist denominations. And so peacemaking and conflict resolution was a big part of his life. In fact, he was a counselor during the Vietnam War for young men who wanted to try to get a conscientious objector ruling in the draft. So I guess I just witnessed on the sidelines him always working this peacemaking kind of part of his life. And I guess I picked up on that some because that seems to be something that I gravitate toward. Not that I like it. Conflict. I don't like conflict, but I'd rather it be resolved. So I guess I work at it that way.
John Reed is asking, what is your exact Myers-Briggs profile?
Oh, Lord, I can't even remember. I
Oh,
know that I'm come down a little bit on the judging side because I want the decisions made.
yeah.
I'm an extrovert, but I also want to have my quiet time too, the alone time. So I can't remember the letters. Sorry. Yeah, it's been
Well,
too many years ago.
it's either N or S, intuitive or sensate, and then feeling or thinking.
Yeah, I definitely thinking, but I also feel emotions deeply. So that's why I say it's interesting that I come out almost down the middle on all four of the letters. I keep thinking I'm going to do the Enneagram one of these days and figure that out, but I've not gotten into it.
Well, one of these days, right? So,
Yeah.
and by the way, Paul Richardson said he's looking into the finding out who's longest serving
Good.
EC.
Good.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your experience with Glory to God as well, because I know that was certainly is one of the, you know, crowning achievements of your
Yeah.
career. And could you just talk a little bit about what it was like to work on that project?
Uh, well, the line I always say is I've never worked harder and I've never enjoyed my work more. It was, yeah, the opportunity of a lifetime. I had fabulous people to work with. The committee was just an amazing group of people, many of whom are on the call and have become uh, active members of the Hymn Society. Um, Working with Mel Bringle as the chair of the committee was an absolute dream. In fact, when I was hired as editor, I said I'll do it if I can ask Mel Bringle to chair the committee. Um, so I knew that we could work together well.
Mhm.
Um, I have to say I fought saying yes to being the editor for quite some time. um, when I first mentioned it to a friend of mine, he said, "Oh my God, man, why don't you just paint a target on your back?" Kind of um, knowing the political side of that kind of work. But I have to say that while there were a few difficult moments, it was by far a more collaborative and congenial process than I anticipated it being. There were very few moments where I thought, why in the world did I ever say yes to this? And a lot of times that reaction was not because of something bad that had happened, but just because of the overwhelming amount of work that it called for. Presbyterian Publishing House is not a music publisher primarily. And so the production staff and the editorial staff really didn't have much of a concept of what was going to go into this project. And the initial production deadlines were, well, you would have laughed if you had looked at them because they expected that once we decided on the content, within a month it would be typeset, proofed, and ready to go to print. Well, yeah, we knew that wasn't possible. And I was having a really hard time trying to convince them that I needed more time. And finally, I hit on the kind of the concept of that every page of the hymnal that we were doing was almost the equivalent of a book, that it had layout issues, it had proofing, it had text that had to be interlined with music. All of those things had to go into it, and then you had to figure out how that was going to fit on a page. And fortunately, I was able to convince them to hire Jim Clemens, another Hymn Society contact, to be the typesetter for it. And he did an absolutely fabulous job with it in very, very tight deadlines. Because while I finally got them to expand those deadlines, they still were way too tight. For about the last year, the Presbyterian Center unlocked the doors, I think at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and they locked them at 6 o'clock in the evening. And I was there when they unlocked, and they kicked me out when they locked for about a year. And I always said I was grateful that the building wasn't open on the weekends, because I would have been there on Saturday and Sunday as well. Because just to do the amount of proofing that was required, and I couldn't take that stuff home really, because all my resources were in my office that I had to check against. And but it was great. I mean, developing the process was a bit tricky, because I was used to working in a church where there's never a shortage of people telling you what and how to do something. But I walked into Presbyterian Publishing, and they showed me my office, and they left, and I'm sitting there going, when's somebody going to tell me what I need to do? And then I went, oh, I guess I have to decide how we're doing this.
Yeah.
So developing the process for selecting the committee, for getting the submissions, and we reviewed approximately 10,000 submissions for the book. So the committee worked really, really hard, because I had to pass along those tight deadlines to them. I wanted to make sure that every decision that was made was at least 2/3 majority of the committee. I didn't want a simple majority. I wanted to be sure the decision was solid enough that we were going to move forward with it. So that meant review teams of 3 people. 2 out of the 3 had to say, yes, let's look at it further. And when it came to the full committee, 2/3 of the committee had to say yes before it went on the tentative list to be included. But it was great. Lifelong memories of that time, and really, really, really a good process.
One of the features that I really admire about that book is the notes that appear below each item by Carl Daw. And how did you all come to that? I'm just curious.
Well, the New Century hymnal had something similar, and while I had a few issues with the way New Century hymnal was put together, I felt there were some really strong elements of that book. And one of them, I thought, here's a way to just in a sentence or two give somebody an entry into a song, a hymn, that they might avoid otherwise, or they might say, why are we bothering to sing this? And so I brought that up to the committee. They agreed. They thought that was a good element. And so Carl was going to be writing the companion for the hymnal. And so I said, as part of that work, can you pull out a couple sentences for each of the things that we decide to go in the book? So as soon as we would decide yes on something to be included, and it was always tentative, as much as I wanted final decisions, I told the committee, all these decisions are tentative until at the very end we say, this is the list. At any point, we can reconsider one of these decisions. And actually, we did that a couple of times, where we would vote something not in to the book, and then somebody would come back at the next meeting and say, I've really been struggling with this. I think we need to reconsider. And we would. So, but we would get that off to Carl, and he would write up those gems, a little sentence or two that would, I think, I would say that's probably the biggest comment that I've heard from people about the book is people always say, and I love those little blurbs about each song at the bottom, you know. So, yeah,
It's such a simple way to address something that I hear people talk about all the time is how people sing with greater understanding if they know a little something about what it is they're singing. I also observe that it's at concerts as well when people, when directors give comments about what they're about to perform, and
yeah,
it's been a great
yeah,
contribution, I think, to the church.
yeah. Yeah, that and as I mentioned, I had such an incredible committee to work with. They worked really hard. They all put their heart and soul into it, and and they weren't getting paid for that work. The publishing house covered their travel expenses for the meetings, but they didn't get any salary for doing all that
Right?
hard work. And there were the whole process. We kind of got a little bit fortunate in that the General Assembly in previous hymnals, the General Assembly had appointed the committee, elected the committee, and all of that had done everything. But on this particular project, the denomination was running short of funds, as we know that is the story now. And they said to the publishing house, yes, you can go ahead and develop a new hymnal, but it's going to have to be on your dime. We can't give you any money. So that meant the publishing house had a little more leeway, which allowed me as the editor to develop a process for putting the committee together. The only input they had was that they said they wanted two members. They wanted at least one member under the age of 25 to be a member of that committee. They wanted some younger input into the process. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to have one, we might as well have two under the age of 25. And so we were fortunate to get Adam Copeland and Chelsea Stern, and who just brought invaluable uh, information and joy and good decision making to the whole process. And of course, they were the two most computer savvy of all of us old folks, and so they were able to really help with a lot of that. We commented over and over about how in the world, thinking about the previous committee for the 1990 Presbyterian hymnal that Melba Costin chaired, and how they had to do all of that with shipping boxes of paper around. They didn't even have email to do that, and we were able to distribute everything to the review teams by email. So it saved us a huge amount of work.
It saved a lot, but it also probably it multiplied the amount of stuff you were able to look at, right?
Well, of
So
course, yes,
yeah,
that
so
too.
right, yeah, wow.
Yeah,
Well, we could talk all day about this stuff, but our
yes, we
time is
could.
actually running a little short. So I'm wondering if there's anything else that I didn't ask you that you were hoping we would talk about today.
Oh, I don't think so. It's been a joy. It's been a joy to share these memories again. It really has been an amazing opportunity for me with all of these different organizations. I loved my time working with the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, and one of my great sadnesses is that I don't get to their conferences all the time, which I would love to do. The Presbyterian Association of Musicians has been a real home as well, and I always say to people though that without the Hymn Society, I'm not sure I would have had all of these contacts to do all this other work. And so I really, when it comes down to it, I give credit to the Hymn Society for sort of supporting and guiding and offering me opportunities in my career that I don't think I would have had otherwise. Yeah.
Well, and you bring so much to all of this as well. I mean, one of the things that I've observed over the years is the joy that you bring to the work and the joy that you bring to our work together. And I value that very much, and I think we all do. So
Oh, thanks, Mike.
thank you
Thanks.
for
Yeah.
that. One final question, and that is, as Hymn Society pushes on, I'm wondering what would be your fondest hope for us?
Well, I've kind of thought about this a bit because, of course, I know you end these interviews with this question, and I wish I had a crystal ball, but I'll just say this, that what keeps coming to my mind is a concern, a hope, whatever to put out into the universe, that we can continue to be a strong binational organization. It concerns me greatly that our Canadian members and friends don't feel comfortable coming to this country anymore because of certain actions of our current administration. And I think that this, along with the ecumenical nature, the binational nature, gets those of us in the United States out of this bubble that we're in, where we focus only on what's happening to us in our world. And I think there's such a danger of that. And the Canadian members take us out of that. They get us to thinking, realizing it's not all about us. And so, yeah, I just really hope we can weather this storm, that we can find a way back to being totally comfortable with hopping across that border and being with each other and making song together.
So well said, Dave. Thank you so much for that insight. I mean, it's a really, and it's also part of our one of our three strategic goals for the coming years. So I think you've really hit on something that's it's important for all of us. And I know that we have some Canadian members on here. Wendy Donaldson, in fact, just thanked you for that comment. So thank you, Dave, for this really wonderful interview. It's just so much fun talking to you today and hearing your
Thanks, Mike.
stories. I really enjoyed it. I know everyone has. So thanks to you and thanks to everybody for joining us today. Next month, we were supposed to be having an interview with Raquel Martinez, but sadly she died about 2 weeks ago, and so we won't be able to do that. But we are going to have Andrew Donaldson for an interview next month, and so we'll be able to pick up some more on the Canadian stuff too, and the importance of being a binational organization. So thank you very much, Dave.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye bye.